happy to be joined today with Dave Rubin from the Rubin Report. How are you doing today?
Jacob, I'm all right. I will let you know how I'm doing in 20 minutes from now. We'll see what kind of interviewer you are.
I promise I'll be one of your favorites after.
All right, let's see.
So, how did you kind of get involved with, I don't really want to say conservatism, but how did you get involved with journalism, being willing to kind of be public and go out there and put your face in front of a camera? How did that journey start for you?
Well, I was crazy enough to start doing stand-up comedy back in May of 1998, literally a week after I graduated college. That was New York Comedy Club. I think it was around May 25th, 1998, doing those late shows where you're on with 15, 20 other comics, 4-hour shows. Most of the guys they're not even comics, they're just kind of people who want to just try something, and the shows are kind of sucky, and we used to call them bringer shows. You got to bring a couple friends, and that's how they give you stage time. And basically, and they'll put anyone on stage if you can bring a couple friends. What you learn as an early comic very quickly is you eventually run out of friends because people don't want to keep paying for the 2 drink minimum and seeing a bunch of crappy comics, which a lot of comedy, especially at the beginning, really is. But started doing that, and then that led, stand-up usually leads to something. There's very few people that get into stand-up that want to remain in stand-up forever. You get a sitcom, or you're a game show host or a talk show host or a movie star or whatever it might be. And I did that for a while, eventually started doing some stuff on the radio. I got a show on Sirius XM. The thing that eventually kind of elevated me at first was the Young Turks Network, where I was back in 2013, where I was really a lefty at that point, progressive. Had my own political awakening, which gets to the second, or I guess it was the first portion of your question about sort of an unlikely conservative that I am. Had my own political awakenings and really just started chatting with some people on the right who I was told were awful, racist, horrible people, like Larry Elder and Dennis Prager and Ben Shapiro and Glenn Beck, and the list goes on and on. And what I always found was these people were nicer, more pleasant. They were generous of spirit and kind. And as that happened, I started thinking about politics a little bit differently. And I think more than anything else, when people, ask me about my career, I mean, I think the secret was that it wasn't a secret, in that I just did it publicly. When people saw me waking up, that famous moment with Larry Elder that I assume you've seen, when people saw him challenge me on systemic racism and I didn't really have an answer, you're seeing me think in real time. And really that was what I've done for now, over 10 years on some version of the Rubin Report. And I think people appreciate just an honest evolution. And then what's been nice is that as I've gone more hardcore into what I think are the right ideas, the country's gone in that way too, and that's what leads to this second Trump administration that we're about to have, with a whole bunch of liberals like RFK and Tulsi and even Elon. So I'm very pleased about the direction things are going in right now.
And what's so interesting is just, how everything has changed. In 2016, you kind of mentioned everybody was like, I'm going to believe everything the mainstream media says. And something that you constantly talk about, which I listened to your show just the other day, and you talked about how MSNBC, and The View, and even people like that are kind of having an awakening effect around them. Where do you kind of see the mainstream media playing when it comes to Gen Z people? You mentioned how it's the start of the end for mainstream media on your show a few days ago, but where do you see it going for Gen Z or millennials getting their news, in your opinion?
Well, for you guys, I mean, the funny thing is, when I used to go to colleges like 10 years ago and talk, I would talk about the difference between what's happening online and mainstream media. Then over the last couple of years, if I go to a college or I give just any talk for any event that I might be at, if I just say CNN, people start laughing. Like, CNN has become a punchline already. And by the way, CNN isn't nearly as horrific as MSNBC is. I mean, that's an absolute, I would say, I always call it the televised mental institution known as MSNBC, because these people are not well. I mean, they're just, you could not be that bad at your job if you tried. If a janitor went in and screwed up things every single day, I'm talking about a janitor at a middle school, if every day he went into his job and somehow things were dirtier every day when he left, he would be fired. But somehow at MSNBC, you could get every single big story wrong: Russia collusion, very fine people on both sides, all of the COVID stuff. We can go through the laundry list of things, and you still have a job. There is no reason that Chuck, I always call him Chuck Scarborough because that was an actual newsman on NBC in New York when I was growing up. But it's Joe Scarborough and his wife and Rachel Maddow and Joy Reid. These people are only paid because they lie. So I think the cool thing. How
You're
old are you?
missing one, Chris Haynes.
Oh, and Chris Hayes, who is a Muppet. I would bet my life there is someone hand up his butt. He is a Muppet. How old are you?
I am 19.
You're 19. So, it's interesting because you're growing up in a time where it was very obvious, probably for you and most of your friends, that something was not right with mainstream, even if you didn't even care about news that much. Like the stiffness of it, the stiltedness, the boxes, the overproduced, all the stuff just probably felt very fake to you. You grew up in a time when you're walking around with a phone and you can get more interesting stuff probably on TikTok and YouTube and everything else. So I think for you guys, the challenge now will be that, I do the best I can on my show to tell people the truth. And I obviously have my opinions. I don't hide those things. But, it's going to be a little more difficult for you to pilfer out some truth out of things and then also still live in the same universe that your friends do. Because let's say you listen to me and Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder, just for an example, let's say we're your three main news sources. Well, now your friend might listen to three people on the other side and have a completely different worldview as to what's happening on any given topic or event. And at some point, that is a problem. So I think that's going to be the next challenge in this kind of information overload that we're in. But frankly, I would rather have more voices. I'd rather it be messier and be closer to the truth than the hyper controlled thing that it didn't have to be as bad as it was. CNN did not have to be this bad. MSNBC did not have to be this bad, but they made their bed. They've got to lay in it. And now everyone's realizing it, which is why Comcast is trying to sell NBC. And many of the CNN hosts are going to be fired within the next year.
Bold prediction. And also you mentioned that I think the big thing is for me is as a listener and other people too is I'll listen to Secular Talk, Kyle Kalinske. I'll listen to Young Turks, Zink Uger. I'll also listen to you. Obviously, I align more with the right side, but I think that's the great thing is you mentioned that private information there. And again, even though I'd lean to the right, I still enjoy hearing Zeke every day say something. I might laugh at him inside my head, or might be like he's actually right for once. But I enjoy the non-mainstream. Even though you're big, you're very big. The Young Turks is big. I enjoy hearing the breakdowns from somebody who has more power over their freedom of speech, and that's what I really like. And I think that's what the
Well,
Gen
that's
Z
great.
generation likes.
That's great. And I love to hear that. That's why I'm not for censoring any of these people. A lot of them over the years, when they were calling everybody racist and Hitler and telling, they wanted people to be kicked off Twitter and YouTube and all of those things. It was like, if you look at the entire catalog on my show, I go after politicians, I go after mainstream media people, but I don't go after any of the people you just mentioned right there. I think even Cenk, who's said unbelievably insane things about me, like I could count the amount of times I've talked about him on my show, and I don't even really like doing it, actually. We did it once this week on my show, and I had a debate with my producer whether it was worth doing, is because he was screaming at somebody on Piers Morgan. But the reason I don't do that is it's like, you know what? You guys want your corner of the internet. I think your ideas are bad. I don't think most of you are entertaining. I certainly don't watch any of you, but go have your thing. I'm not going to try to destroy your life or your career. Unfortunately, they have a slightly different take on it when it comes to, say, me and Ben and Crowder and Bongino and everybody else.
For sure. And then the next thing I wanted to discuss, if you don't mind me asking, is something that I saw on a few people's stories throughout college after the election was as a gay or trans person, my rights are over. The world is totally over. Trump's going to come in. He's going to take every one of my rights away. From your perspective, of course, being a gay man, what can you say? Because all these people I saw in their stories were like, the world's over. I'm going to have no rights. I'd like to have a voice of reasoning in this, if you don't
Yeah, I
mind.
mean, I'm here in the state of Florida. I'll say the word gay. Let's see what happens. Nothing. Nothing happened. I said gay in Florida. Nothing happened. It's not that exciting. You can go to Miami Beach and there a drag queen will serve you a mimosa or something like that. I don't know what they're drinking over there, but it's all completely absurd. Donald Trump does not care about that sort of thing. The modern Republican Party does not care about that sort of thing. Donald Trump is the first time president to go in being for gay marriage. Barack Obama didn't even.
Hillary
Um, and
Clinton.
the and Hillary Clinton didn't. So the progressives of 2050, they're going to be burning down the Obama library. And by their logic, it'll be he was a bigot back in his time. He was a bigot. And that's what the danger of progressivism is. It's good to progress, but you want to progress to more equality and more freedom, not just progress to the new idea of the day. So I can tell you this, I know plenty of gay people in Florida, and they're doing just fine. There's nobody coming for your rights. They've like there's no argument around it. So what right do they not want gay people to have? Are gay people allowed to work? Are like gay people allowed to have a car or be in the relationships they want or whatever else? It's just complete absurdity and fear mongering. But unfortunately, the left a long time ago, I would say, stopped making good arguments and threw everything into you're a bigot, you're a transphobe, you're a homophobe, et cetera.
For sure, good point. And then a few other things I wanted to discuss is what do you think, as somebody who covered this election so closely yourself? Obviously, people tune into a lot of people. What was something that you felt different this time over 2016 or 2020? I guess more so 2016, or you're still kind of converting over to the right, but specifically maybe 2020. What was the big difference you saw in the way you interviewed people, or just the people you talked to, or people who
Sure. Well,
commented
I
on
mean, the
your
big
show?
difference of this one, if you go back to the 2016, so it's Hillary and Trump. I actually voted for Gary Johnson, who was the libertarian. I really couldn't stand Hillary, but I wasn't there on Trump yet, so I was like, I'm in Cali anyway. In some ways, it doesn't matter. I'll vote for Gary Johnson. In 2020, I was very happy to be voting for Trump. I was very, very proud when I voted that day. Um, I would say the difference between those two and this one was, to me, this one was the one whether America was going to continue in any way that we've known it and loved it or not. We're only a 248-year-old country. We'll be 250 in 2 years, and I want to make it to 250. Trump tweeted something to this effect that we can fix so many things that our 250th anniversary could be the greatest celebration of American freedom that we could ever imagine. And that really was what was on the ballot. The ballot was, do we want to become a socialist nation? Do we want hyper control and authoritarian ruling over all of our decisions? Or do you want to try something else? And I actually think that now what Trump represents, especially because of Elon and RFK and Tulsi and some of those other people, is he represents the widest tent that has ever been formulated in America, certainly in modern politics, certainly in my time. There's no bigotry here. Trump is not running because he doesn't like black people or doesn't like white or gays, or it's also stupid and idiotic, but they decided to not make arguments. So I'm very, very bullish on the future. And if you would have, if Kamala had won, the election was 16 days ago. If Kamala had won, I think like many people, I'd be in some kind of depression. Now, I get it that the people on the left are in some kind of depression right now, but I hope they won't be in a depression when they see success of America. And I think that's what's on the horizon.
And again, I am excited to see, is he going to end the wars? Is he going to get the Israel and Palestine conflict done with? Because nobody really cares about what side you're on. They just want the war to stop. That's what they want.
Yeah.
They just
Well,
want it
look,
to
if
stop.
the thing is, well, that's also the interesting thing, because if you want the war to stop, then the simple way of the war to stop is you have to let Israel get their hostages back, get the Americans back, and then the war's over. The war could have been over if we had strong administration. All Joe Biden had to do was on October 8th call Qatar and say, guys, you're shutting down this war and you're immediately releasing these hostages. Otherwise, we're going to blow up Qatar. I'm not for blowing up Qatar or just attacking nations, but you have peace through strength, and we've decided to have peace through weakness, or we've had peace through don't. Right? Their thing was don't. Well, it doesn't mean anything. So I think it's obvious that you can feel it across the world right now. People know Trump's on the way in, and I think behaviors are already adjusting in that sense.
No doubt about that. And then just a few other things I wanted to touch on before I close with advice
Sure.
is what cabinet pick are you kind of most looking forward to? Obviously, you've interviewed a lot of people. Who are you most looking forward to? I've had Tom Holman on. I'm excited to see how he's going to go. But to
Yeah.
you, who are you kind of maybe most excited about? There's so many great
Good for
options.
you getting
So
Homan on. I haven't even had Homan on. Good for you.
it was in person at Turning Point USA, and I saw him and walked past him and was like, "Can you come around the corner?" And we got 2 minutes and 5 seconds last December. So it was the hustler vibe.
Nice. Well, look, I think he's going to do a great job. I keep saying my line on him on the show is that this guy would play himself in the movie. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen someone who looks like the guy who's going to do the deportations and acts like the guy. Like if Hollywood was casting, it's like, get me Tom Homan to play Tom Homan. The guy that I think is that I'm most interested in, and I do know him fairly well, and he is a Florida guy like me, is Marco Rubio, because to get to what we were just discussing about the Middle East, it's like the world wants a strong America. And to now go out there and he's going to represent America on the world stage and push forward the Trump foreign policy, which has been pretty damn good, and say to everybody, hey, America's back. We're not taking any more BS. We're not looking to nation build. We're not looking to fight with everybody. But there is some order to the world, and America wants something to do with it because we actually are a good nation and a just nation. He has a huge job to do. I mean, everybody does. RFK does in terms of health and HHS. Obviously, there's going to be a whole whoever ends up getting DOJ, which it's not going to be Gates now. It's like there's a whole bunch of stuff that has to be dealt with there. But on just like the sort of pro-America front across the world, I think Rubio as Secretary of State compared to this clown Blinken is going to be like night and day.
I 100% agree with you on that. Even if you're a conservative and you're worried about some of his policies with Rubio, it's night and day, like you said there. And then
You
kind of
also
two
have to
last.
understand that even if you don't like whatever you might think Rubio's policies are, which I people sort of I get some inkling of that, but I'm not even sure what they mean by that. But the Secretary of State is not really setting policy. The Secretary of State is executing the policy that is dictated by the president. So what you need is someone that is a good communicator, someone that will say what they believe, and I do believe that about Rubio.
And especially with him, he can speak many different languages. That's
Yep.
another plus, and that's something that it could be the difference, in some of these really tight conflicts that are going on around the world right now, unfortunately. And then two last things before I go into what advice you have for young people, which is always how I like to close. Who's maybe the favorite person, or the favorite thing that you've ever been able to do with your show, The Rubin Report?
Oh man, I mean,
And
it's hard to.
maybe interview you've done, and then just the best part of your job. How about that?
Sure. I mean, I think the most impactful interview that I ever did was the Thomas Sowell interview because Thomas, or Dr. Sowell, I should say, is now, I think, 93 or 94. We interviewed him about 5 or 6 years ago, obviously, but still getting up there in years. I knew what a legend he was and how rare he does interviews. And we had that great moment where I asked him, how did he wake up to socialism and Marxism? And he goes, facts. And that thing has now been seen millions of times. Elon has even retweeted it. So I think that was probably the most impactful one because the idea that a younger generation of people got interested in Thomas Sowell partly because of me is just incredible. I'd say the most sort of, oh, I guess I did make it kind of moment was that, for 20 years I was a huge fan, not for 20 years, for 30 years I was a huge fan of Bill Maher. I wanted to be on Politically Incorrect, which was on TV well before you were born even. I think it was canceled in 2001. So yeah, you weren't even born at that point. And the fact that I got not only I've done Club Random podcast with him a couple of times, but that I got to do real time with him. I did have a moment when I was sitting on stage where I was like, man, this is what I wanted for forever in my career, and I got it. And hopefully you'll have that moment one day. I'm sure you will. And it's like that's a pretty cool thing.
No doubt about it. Congratulations. And then what advice would you have for younger people? I think this one just kind of goes off of like, what would you have told yourself differently? And then I also want to sneak in, do you have a favorite comedian, since you did mention that it all started with
Yeah,
comedy?
yeah. Well, I would say just say what you believe. Say what you believe. Like there's so many, the icing of cancel culture and all this craziness and you post something on here and somebody says something mean to you and all this stuff. Like it is not good for anybody. Say what you believe. You will, I guarantee you, if you start saying what you believe, it will not work out poorly for you. It will almost always work out better. It doesn't mean that there won't be repercussions. It doesn't mean you won't be wrong about some stuff or offend some people, but it is better. People will know you in a more authentic way. And trust me, like when you're 19 and you're like, man, I got my 10 friends in my crew, but six of them don't really know what I think about this or that. It's like eventually now you're 30 and you're like, well, wow, now I have these same 10 friends, which most likely you don't have the same 10 friends at that point. But let's say you hung on to all of them 10 years later. But now it's 10 years later and they still don't know really what you think about something. And now you're 40 and you've all got kids and they still don't know what you think about things. Eventually it's like, well, what is the purpose of a friendship? So I would say being as truthful as you can with your beliefs and sharing them with the people around you, you will find better people if you're worried about the people that are currently around you.
Appreciate you sharing that advice. And I think that goes to everybody on all sides of the political
Oh
spectrum.
yeah.
And then do you got a favorite comedian of all time?
Oh man, well, George Carlin to me is the greatest comic of all time. When you look at the breadth of work, I don't know, 12 HBO specials, that his last one, which I think it was called It's Bad for You, is I would say as good as any special that he did for years. He had a couple thinner years right before that. But he was an absolute master linguist and hysterically funny and saying something true. And it would have been nice to have had him in this decade of cancel culture, because he would have been an old white guy going to colleges telling these kids what's up. So I miss him terribly, and I think somebody tried to do an AI comedy special of him, which is sort of twistedly evil. But yeah, he would be the number one on my Mount Rushmore.
Awesome. Well, Dave, thank you so much for joining the show today, and I hope to see you in person sometime.
I enjoyed it, Jacob. Thank you.
Appreciate it.